The priests of ancient Egypt were the architects of eternity. They were the solemn guardians of sacred rites, the keepers of divine knowledge, and the only real bridge between the mortal world and the sprawling pantheon of the gods. In a society completely obsessed with what comes after death, the priest was the gatekeeper, the guide who paved the way for pharaohs and nobles to live forever. Their authority was huge, their rituals were intricate, and their power came from one extraordinary tool, a collection of spells we now call the Book of the Dead. But this isn't just a simple story of power and prestige. It's a story of a profound and deeply hidden anxiety. The Book of the Dead was the ultimate cheat sheet for eternity, a collection of spells so potent they could overcome death itself. But what if the very men who guarded its secrets, the high priests of Egypt, were the ones most burdened by it? This isn't a story about the fear of the dead, but about the pressure felt by the living who held the fate of souls in their hands. They knew that a single mistake, one misspoken word, could unleash the very horrors the book was meant to protect against. To get this, we first have to understand that the Book of the Dead wasn't a book like you and I would think of one. No two copies were the same. It was a customized scroll, a divine manuscript the Egyptians knew as the spells for coming forth by day. Each scroll was a unique arsenal of magic, a spiritual toolkit tailor-made for a specific soul's dangerous journey, and the priests were the ones crafting this divine weaponry. Their anxiety wasn't born of superstition, but of intimate and frankly terrifying knowledge. They understood the stakes. The ancient Egyptian worldview rested on a razor's edge, a delicate balance between cosmic order known as Ma'at and the relentless forces of chaos, or Isfet. Ma'at was truth, harmony, and justice. It was the very structure of existence. Isfet was violence, lies, and disorder, the endless abyss that threatened to swallow everything. Every soul that successfully navigated the afterlife reinforced Ma'at. But every soul that failed, every soul lost to the monsters of the underworld, was a victory for chaos. The priests weren't just fighting for one person's eternity. They were fighting to hold the universe together, and in their hands they held a tool so powerful, so dangerous, that its misuse could not only damn a soul, but also, in their view, chip away at the very foundations of creation. This was the source of their dread, the crushing weight of cosmic responsibility, the problem, the perilous landscape of eternity. So what problem was the Book of the Dead actually trying to solve? To understand that, we have to go where every ancient Egyptian expected to go, into the terrifying and treacherous landscape of the afterlife. For them, death wasn't an end. It was a violent, uncertain transition through a realm called the Duat. This was a place of profound danger, a celestial obstacle course where a soul's survival was far from guaranteed. First, let's talk about what was making this journey. The Egyptian concept of the soul was way more complex than ours. It was a multi-part being. There was the Ka, a person's spiritual double that stayed in the tomb needing food and drink. And then there was the Ba, a human-headed bird that represented the individual's personality and could travel between worlds. The ultimate goal was to reunite the Ka and Ba after death's trials. If they succeeded, the deceased became an Ak, a glorified spirit who could live among the gods forever. But if any of these parts were destroyed, or if they failed to reunite, it meant the second death, not just oblivion, but total annihilation. The arena for this quest was the Duat. Often mistaken for a kind of hell, the Duat was actually the realm of the sun god, Ra. Every night, Ra sailed his boat through the 12 hours of the night, fighting chaos to be reborn at dawn. The goal for the dead was to join Ra on his journey, help protect his boat, and be reborn with him in the morning. But this was no pleasure cruise. The Duat was a landscape of nightmares. The journey was built around 12 gates or pylons, one for each hour of the night. Each gate was a new level of terror, guarded by a host of grotesque and malevolent beings. These weren't just mindless monsters. They were thinking guardians with awful names and even worse forms. Imagine coming up to a massive gate spitting fire, guarded by a creature named He Who Lives on Snakes, or Blood Drinker from the Slaughterhouse. There were serpent-headed guards, knife-wielding demons. To pass, you couldn't use brute force. You had to prove your spiritual worth by addressing each guardian by its secret, true name. The Egyptian belief in the power of names was absolute. Knowing a being's name gave you power over it. Without this secret knowledge written down in their personalized Book of the Dead, the soul would be turned away, or worse, destroyed. And the gatekeepers were just the start. The waterways of the Duat were filled with supernatural crocodiles and snakes, ready to devour any soul that strayed off the path. The greatest threat of all, the very embodiment of chaos, was the colossal serpent, Apep. Apep was Ra's arch-enemy, a creature of pure malice whose only goal was to swallow the sun and plunge the universe into eternal darkness. As Ra's boat sailed through the Duat, Apep would attack. The dead, as passengers, weren't just watching, they were part of this cosmic battle. Their own survival was tied to the sun gods. Even if a soul got past the gates and monsters, they still had to deal with horrifying places like the Lake of Fire. This wasn't for purification, it was for the complete destruction of the unworthy. Souls who failed their judgment were thrown into these fiery pits to be unmade, to suffer the finality of the second death. This fear of utter non-existence was the deepest terror in the Egyptian psyche. It was the prospect of being totally forgotten, of having never existed at all, that drove the entire system of mummification, tomb building, and magical preparation. This was all a race against time. The Egyptians believed the soul needed its physical body to return to each night. That's why mummification was so critical. If the body decayed before the soul finished its journey, the link was severed and the soul would perish. This added a ticking clock to an already impossible ordeal. It was a vision of the afterlife so full of peril that it demanded a powerful, divine solution. The solution, the divine arsenal of spells. Faced with the overwhelming terrors of the Duat, the ancient Egyptians didn't just give up, they developed a technology. Not of bronze and stone, but a technology of the soul. A divine arsenal of sacred words and magical images. This was the true purpose of what we call the Book of the Dead, or more accurately, the spells for coming forth by day. It wasn't a book to be read, but a weapon to be wielded, a map to follow, and a set of keys to unlock the gates of eternity. Each Book of the Dead was a custom job, a papyrus scroll carefully crafted for an individual. Some were simple, others were sprawling works of art, filled with vibrant illustrations called vignettes that brought the spells to life. These scrolls were placed in the coffin, a tangible guide for the intangible soul. The core idea was simple but profound. Knowledge is power. The Egyptians believed the universe was governed by words and names. To know the true name of a demon was to command it. To recite an incantation correctly was to bend reality. The Book of the Dead was the ultimate supernatural intelligence briefing. The spells inside were incredibly specific, each designed to beat a particular threat. There were spells of protection, for example. Spell 31 was for repelling a crocodile, while spell 34 was for not being bitten by a snake. These weren't vague prayers, they were direct commands, often spoken as if the dead person was a god themselves, declaring, "Get back, retreat, for I am Horus." Then there were the spells of transformation. These were some of the most creative and powerful. The deceased could turn into a swift falcon to fly over obstacles, a lotus to symbolize rebirth, or a graceful heron. This was strategic adaptation. By becoming a falcon, the soul borrowed the power of a god. By becoming a lotus, which closes at night and opens in the morning, the soul aligned itself with the sun's cycle of rebirth. There were even spells for preventing hunger, thirst, or humiliation. Spell 52 is bluntly titled Spell for Not Eating Excrement in the Underworld. Others guaranteed a steady supply of bread, beer, and cool water. But all of these protections led to one climactic moment, Spell 125, the final exam. The soul would enter the Hall of Two Truths and stand before 42 divine judges. Here, they had to perform the negative confession, a list of 42 sins they had not committed. Addressing each judge by name, the soul would declare, "I have not stolen. I have not murdered. I have not made anyone weep." After the confession came the ultimate trial, the weighing of the heart. The Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of a person's conscience. The jackal-headed god Anubis would lead the deceased to a golden scale. On one side, he'd place the heart. On the other, a single white ostrich feather, the symbol of the goddess of truth, Ma'at. The ibis-headed god Thoth stood by to record the verdict. If the heart, unburdened by sin, balanced perfectly with the feather, the soul was declared true of voice and welcomed by Osiris into the paradise of the field of reeds. But if the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, the scale would tip, and waiting right there was a creature from your worst nightmares, Amit, the devourer of the dead. Amit was a terrifying chimera with the head of a crocodile, the front of a lion, and the back of a hippopotamus, a combination of the three animals most feared by the Egyptians. If the heart was found wanting, it would be tossed to Amit and devoured on the spot. This was the dreaded second death, the complete erasure of the soul from existence. Even for this, the Book of the Dead offered one last defense. Spell 30, often inscribed on a heart-shaped scarab amulet, was a plea for the soul's own heart not to testify against it. The Book of the Dead was the complete package. It was a guide through the darkness, a weapon against monsters, and a script for the final judgment. It was the ultimate expression of the Egyptian belief that eternity wasn't a gift, but something to be actively and perilously won. The hidden consequence, the terror of the scribe and priest. The Book of the Dead was the perfect solution to the terrors of the afterlife. But for the men who actually made these scrolls, the lector priests and sacred scribes, it was something else entirely. It was a source of immense, crushing pressure. Their anxiety wasn't about the demons in the papyrus, but about the very power they were using. It was the fear of imperfection, the dread of a single catastrophic mistake that could doom their client's soul and upset the cosmic balance they were sworn to protect. To get this, you have to forget our modern idea of writing. For the ancient Egyptians, hieroglyphs weren't just symbols, they were magical and alive. They were the words of the god, invented by Thoth himself. To write a hieroglyph was to perform a magical act. This put an almost unbearable burden on the scribe, creating a Book of the Dead. Imagine the scribe hunched over a roll of papyrus. He's not just a copyist, he's an engineer of salvation. What if his hand slips while drawing the sign for protection? Would the shield he's making for the soul now have a fatal crack? What if he omits a single word from a spell? That's not a typo, it's a hole in the soul's spiritual armor. It was a constant, nagging pressure to be perfect, knowing a simple human error could lead to damnation for the person who had placed their trust and a lot of money in his hands. This pressure was even worse for the lector priest, the specialist who recited the spells aloud during funerals. The most critical of these was the opening of the mouth ceremony. Using special tools, the priest would touch the mummy's mouth, eyes and ears while reciting powerful incantations, magically reanimating the senses for the afterlife. This wasn't a quiet reading, it was a sacred performance. The spell's power was in its perfect vocalization. What if his voice cracked? What if he mispronounced a divine name and accidentally summoned a demon instead of a protector? The priest was a conduit for divine power, and any failure on his part could have irreversible consequences. This burden went beyond just one soul. Priests were the custodians of Ma'at, the cosmic order. Every soul guided safely to paradise was a reinforcement of Ma'at, a small victory against chaos. A soul devoured by Amit was more than a personal tragedy. It was a small victory for Isfet, weakening the universal order. So, the priest's anxiety was not just about professional failure, but about cosmic negligence. The secret knowledge itself was a source of pressure. Knowing the true names of demons and the layout of the underworld was dangerous. Handling these spells was like handling magical explosives. One misstep could be catastrophic, not just for the dead, but for the living priest. This might be why some spells seem intentionally obscure, a magical shorthand to protect the uninitiated, and maybe the priests themselves. To even touch these texts, priests had to be in a state of absolute ritual purity, shaving their bodies, wearing clean linen, and fasting, all to avoid corrupting the sacred magic they handled. And finally, their anxiety was grounded in the real world. Their clients were pharaohs, queens, and powerful nobles. A priest who messed up a funeral for a vizier wouldn't just face divine payback in the next life. He could face ruin in this one. A bad reputation meant the end of his career and social disgrace. In a society where religious authority and political power were so tangled, the fear of mortal accountability was just as real as the fear of divine wrath. They were the ultimate contractors, and their deliverable was eternity, no refunds. This led to a kind of institutional anxiety too. The priest's power was tied to their monopoly on this sacred knowledge. They feared what would happen if the keys fell into the wrong hands, or if the magic was misused by common people, diluting their authority and angering the gods. The secrecy was about protecting the dead, yes, but it was also about protecting their own power and the very fabric of society from the chaos that could be unleashed. In the end, the story of the priests and the Book of the Dead is a fascinating paradox. The very tool that gave them unmatched power was also the source of their deepest anxieties. They were masters of a divine technology they knew was fundamentally unstable, gambling with the fate of a human soul and the order of the cosmos every time they used it. Their fear wasn't of the grotesque monsters in their scrolls. They knew those were just obstacles, and they had the answers. No, their anxiety was much more intimate. It was the anxiety of their own human fallibility, the fear of a shaky hand, a faltering voice, a moment of lost concentration. It was the pressure of the artisan who knows a single flaw can lead to total, catastrophic failure. They were shepherds of souls, guiding their flock through the valley of death. But unlike their flock, they'd seen the map. They knew every monster lurking in the dark. They understood the path was a razor's edge, with the abyss of chaos waiting on either side. The Book of the Dead wasn't just a guide for the deceased. It was a constant, haunting reminder to the priests of their awesome and terrifying responsibility. Every soul they saved was a testament to their skill, but every scroll they wrote was a breathtaking risk, a sacred and anxious wager with eternity itself. So which part of the journey through the Duat do you find the most terrifying? The knife-wielding guardians at the 12 gates, the final judgment in the Hall of Two Truths, or the monstrous devourer Amit waiting by the scales? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to delve deeper into the mysteries of the ancient world, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more journeys into history's most fascinating secrets.